The last 5 or 6 years was the big rush. A lot of people getting in the space. A lot of people thinking they can just jump in there and grab it and it's going to be easy. You learn that very quickly that that's not the case. And the ground game is what's important.
Development should be boring. What I always try to speak to is like, how can we make this boring? How can we make this a way that thinks about how to do this in a thoughtful, responsible way?
Setting the tone of what's going to be allowed and what's not. And how do you address the needs of business to progress and address the needs of the community?
The good signal to me is when we're being thoughtful, we're understanding what makes every individual relationship winner we deal with tick, shaping opportunities that are meaningful to their concerns. Every developer needs time to understand that and look at that and analyze that, and then understand their impact and what we can do to mitigate that, and then put together a solution that's thoughtful and responsible.
How do you establish those guardrails for, hey, this is how we're going to act as an economy, as a population, as a state?
Oh man, we got some work to do. We got some work to do.
We probably need 1,000 more Drew Burkes in this industry. Be more like Drew.
Land insights, market trends, industry experts. Welcome to the Land Department Podcast, the state of land and energy as we see it.
Brent, we've been talking about renewables. We've been talking about data centers. We've got a really fun conversation today. You getting your AI usage in so we can start building more data centers?
Listen, I'm burning tokens up at a ridiculous pace. I don't even know. I'm just going in circles, man.
Make it rain.
I feel like Dudley Land Company supporting the AI business
There
in general. But no, yeah. So this new thing out there, I don't know if you've heard of it, is there's data centers being built. And it's kind of a hot topic, but yeah. But no, Drew Burke's joining us today, and Drew's, he works with Hanwha. We've done some support for those guys. Natalie and I were talking a couple months ago, like, man, we need to, there's so much here to unpack, and there's so much changing day in and day out. You know, the rules of the game are being written as we do this, and we're trying to figure it out. And we're looking for someone who has a unique perspective in this business. And Drew's the first one that came to mind. And so we reached out to him, and he was gracious enough to join us. So Drew, welcome, man.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. And, great way to start off August, actually it's the 31st of July. We're getting there, but
we're getting there.
Happy to join this conversation. And yeah, I've listened to you guys before, and I'm really passionate about all the things y'all do and the team does. And Landman have definitely in my heart when it comes to the work we're doing. And so, yeah, happy to get into the conversation on that.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Yeah. So tell us, man, bring us up to speed. You've got such a really unique, cool career arc. Just give us a rundown, man. Bring us to today.
Yeah. So, first and foremost, I'm a fun-loving dad of two kids. And, I live here in Houston, Texas, but, I was foundationally, I started out in the military, my career on the U.S. Army. It's quite interesting because I was actually in the telecommunications side of the military, Signal Corps. So there's some things that kind of bring me back full circle to where I am today with the data center world. But especially back then, we had a lot of efforts on making sure we have a network in remote environments in Iraq and other places to put in place key trunk lines, conduits for fiber when fiber was a big deal, voice over IP, but we were dealing with kilobits per second and not the gigawatt per second that we deal with now, and the GPUs and TPUs and all those kind of things. It was much more of that, like SIPRNet, SINCHRONET, and you have the VoIP phones. Have you ever heard of those? Voice over IP.
Yeah,
that was a big thing back then, and
it was.
That was a fun time of getting all those radio frequencies in and using tactical satellites and helping the warfighters all across the world, while still using like diesel cat generators from that are just going
from the 70s,
on and on and on. So still same technology. So those things are running and humming and helping even us today in the work that we're going to be doing.
It's kind of cool how foundationally, just you're at that part in your life where you're just soaking everything in, and to look to see where that takes you today, it's still relevant, and it's still just in that space.
Absolutely.
You think that it shapes how you think.
Yeah.
So one of the cool things, it's one of the cool things about your careers, and we were talking about a little bit before we started, was your time at Shell. And tell us about what you were doing there.
Yeah, so Shell is it's funny because when most people think about Shell, they think about oil and gas, and specifically upstream and a lot of those appomattox and wells and things that we've done, in the Gulf of America or Gulf of Mexico, however you want to call it these days. But we've been at Shell, it's like companies within companies. So I've had the privilege at Shell to work across like both the molecule side and on the electron side. So the first part of my career, I'd say the first 5-6 years was in the refining side, more the downstream side of the business, closer to the products. So I had an opportunity to deal with a lot of the supply chain elements on the commercial side with, the likes of GE, turbo machinery, Dresseran, and service agreements.
Yeah. It's a whole other world.
Yeah. So negotiated a lot of different types of contractual deals with suppliers all over the world. So always been close to agreements and business to business partnerships and services that, our organization need. I've also had a chance to work in our retail, field sales and marketing business. So they think of like Circle K or think of Buc-ee's and, those kind of things. I was when managing JVs and joint ventures in that space. So as part of
a lot of B2B,
a lot of B2B, commercial real estate, selling properties and, just trying to figure out what's the right portfolio and how do we get the most money out of that car wash as well as still sell the fuel, in the business. And so it was like a very interesting business because most of the power business and most of the oil and gas business upstream isn't as close to the customer. So that's where I really learned a lot about the customer value proposition. And it was really a good way to start to think about like how, our product and our services, play a role because there's less engineering, but more, trying to figure out like, who are the customer segments, where is the site, and all the good things like that as far as a siting perspective to get the most revenue. And then I also then worked in onshore wind. I was, that's kind of when I started moving into the power side. And on the power side, like probably around 2012, 13, I was really just moving things along in terms of overseeing asset management of wind development. This is a great time to get a feel for also on the land side, like how these agreements came up around our surveys, as well as when the wind turbine has an outage or issue. The landowner will call me directly. And so that's where I got a feel for like, well, why is this so relevant to them? Why do they care? And what are they making on this in a royalty perspective? And so I got introduced to that world too, when I got into the asset management of wind. But then later on in my career, and I'm sorry, I'm just messing with this mic because my ears are too small. But later on, I moved into offshore wind after that. And this was back in 2016 when it first got kicked off. So it was a good opportunity to get away from the onshore wind side, but then move into the space of what was going on with
what could be.
It could be. And so that's where I got a lot of learning from what's happening today in the data center world related to how fast things are moving. Because we went from like number 2 people, and I was the number 2 guy, to like 200 people in like, in the course of 2 years. So it was an effort to try to see and understand like supply chain constraints and how the markets are shaping, how the regulations trying to catch up to it all across the Northeast and as well as the West Coast. And then the last thing I say about Shell is I was involved with creating 2 JVs, 2 ventures in transmission codes. So one of which was called California Western Grid Development, and the other one was called Mid-Atlantic Offshore Development. So those are like around trying to create the highway for subsea transmission in HVDC to bring a huge mainframe amount of like 5 gigawatts of power into the network. So berming, conduits, easements, all those things to get, like it would say, 15 miles onshore into a collector station, 500, megawatts and dealing with that kind of thing and managing and working with partners on that. So that was a fun feat. So again, a lot of it ties to some of the things I've been working on. Before
we did a podcast. We did a podcast recently with Jigger Shaw, and we spent a good part of that conversation talking about what today's data center team needs to look like and the requisite experience that those and skill sets that those teams need to have to be able to bring all this together. And that's one of the reasons we wanted you on here, because you got such a unique career path. You touch all these little things, and that builds to the skill set that you need today to do your job now at Hanwha. So
yes, sir.
It's man, so many disciplines need to go into these teams and so many things need to come together. We're going to talk a lot about that today. But bring us into where you are now and what you do for Hanwha now.
Yeah, so I joined Hanwha about a little over 2 years ago, and I jumped over here. So I went away from the ocean water rights off the outer continental shelf and moved back on the land side because I missed the wind business and the solar business because I was, and then so when I joined Hanwha, I was involved with their solar development and invest development in Texas, and so that was kind of a crash course into getting back into what's happening. And it was fun. I really enjoyed the
All
last
of
2
us.
years. Yeah.
You and
So-
us is also,
Yeah.
it's been, feel like it's been a constant crash.
Yeah. But what was interesting about Hanwha's portfolio in the solar development side, we have a lot of interest in West Texas, and we have some sites that are, right in the mix in the swing of things of all the oil and gas and in encumbrances and surface use issues and challenges. So I stepped right into that right away, as well as stepped into a big mandate to say, hey, go after and get about 1 gigawatt of development in next year. And so my team and I we were in charge of really greenfielding and working through in an area across Texas where, as you can appreciate, around this time, we had roughly around, there was I would say about 150 gigawatts of solar and 150 gigawatts of gas in the queue. And so already, so I'm working off it already being really picked over, but I was working off of it already being saturated the market, right? So
Yeah.
and as you can appreciate, you have to have a different way of working to make that happen. I brought in, we have a team. We put all of the contract land agents under my remit, as well as our land team as well. And we went after it really, really hard. All the traditional things, outreach campaigns, letters, calls, cold calls. A lot of those things were working. We were failing at it. And we were like, what the hell's going on? Why aren't these people biting on anything? And it's this option fatigue. They've been, picked over so many different times. And so we had to really change our approach.
They're getting a call every week.
Yeah. So we really had to change our approach and get on the ground and do some unique things to really find a way to prove that, it's worth either trying again or it's worth thinking about our value proposition different than what they've heard from other folks. And so, and my boss, John Mack at the time, is a good mentor. He said, Drew, you joining, get out there, get in the field. I spend a lot of time on the roads. They call me the closer. I come in there and help too as well. Anyone I can as well with the team, especially when it comes to just being very transparent and genuine around what we can do, what we can control, and how it's a win-win for everyone. So it was a fun time there on that side of Hanwha. So that made it very natural for me to be able to move over to the data center world. So within this past year, when, there was a big focus for us to continue to grow in the data center side. And I'll speak a little bit about Hanwha and the data center in a minute here, but it was just a natural transition for me because there was already been a large amount of, I think I looked at about 900 areas of interest across Texas in the last 2 years. So we had a pretty good, run shot of, snapshot and CRM.
What's out there,
what are the challenges, transmission grid, who has what, there's no 345 kV substation just sitting there just waiting for you that says you can click right into it. We know how difficult it is in different areas, or whether it's east of I-35, south, or west of I-35. So it was a bit fun. But just real briefly, quickly about Hanwha though, a little bit more, because I think it's good to know a little bit about, especially on the data center side too as well. So Hanwha's been in the business of data center development for about over 15 years in South Korea, and so they've been really jumping at the effort to move and since 2024 into the space, and as they moved into the space, they recognize that even though we're a small team in the U.S. now, there's just so many other pillars that they bring to the table that could help bring a tailored suite of solutions. And so we have effectively, we're not just powered land developers. We are trying to work in a way that we can also bring the power to projects, and because we are in-house manufacturer of recip engines to provide bridge power, also gas burning turbines or prime power. So we're doing that in different other industry, other sectors, and so we're just trying to make sure that we can have earned the right to grow with other parties and with the hypers that we talk to all the time, scalers, on bringing those type of projects to fruition. And so right now we're knee deep on one of our key flagship projects that is not undisclosed right now, but should be announced hopefully soon. And then that's giving us the momentum as I work on site selection for the rest of the pipeline as we grow that, which is part of my remit right now, to also bring those into the next phase of projects that we're delivering for our customers.
Yeah.
In truth, for those that might not be aware, Hanwha went through a rebrand, right? So
Yeah.
you guys were formerly 174 Power Global, which was a leading player in the industry. So a lot of folks might not recognize the Hanwha name, but I guarantee they probably would recognize 174 Power Global. So it's important for them to know it's one and the same.
Yeah. There was a merger recently, and just really is all internal, just bringing all in one house, because we also have Q cells, and most folks in the solar development world know Q cells because they're like one of the leading solar manufacturers in the U.S.
Big
and
player.
we have a couple major factories in Cartersville, Georgia, and Dalton area and county, and we're big in that space too. So that's also part of our arm, one of our other kind of verticals. And we're also big, and a lot of folks don't know this, in the shipbuilding space too. Hanwha Oceans, where we have a big contract with Philly, the shipyard, the Philly shipyard, where we're spending billions of dollars on really helping to revitalize the shipbuilding industry with support of the Department of War to support our efforts to make sure we revitalize that market too. And then the last thing I'll just mention real briefly is that we're also in the energy space for retail services, retail providing services. So we do under a brand called Chariot Energy. We sell retail power to C&I and residential customers across Texas, and also now in PJM too. So as you can appreciate, when you're doing something like a data center development and you're working through these things, you're trying to think through like, well, I have a customer here, whether on a hyperscaler, whether it's Oracle, Amazon, Microsoft, and how can we not just bring power in, but bring all the things that we have to bear to support their overall fleet of services. And so that's the trust we're trying to earn. But my trust first starts on the front end with the landowners and bringing on the site selection, but then on the back end, it's also kind of bringing in harmony the players who are really trying to meet demand goals around getting to the compute capacity that they need to solve the challenges that we need to for this AI battle that we're working through. So all being said, this is a great mission. Back to my military roots, this is like, I'm a go-getter around this, and I love the fact that this is kind of the mission that we're working through today. And so I've been persistent at trying to figure out a way to make sure we all deliver and move it all along.
Yeah. Drew, your story and the story of Hanwha and others like it is it's the common theme, right? Mm-hmm. There's all these individual aspects of putting these projects together, and you got different players and different skill sets and different teams, and it's a mad dash. I mean, we talk a lot about land. Land is the root of everything. You don't have anything if you don't have land. And the last 5 or 6 years was the big rush. You touched on it earlier. A lot of people getting in the space, a lot of landowner fatigue, a lot of outreach, a lot of people thinking they can just jump in there and grab it and it's going to be easy. You learn that very quickly that that's not the case, and the ground game is what's important. And as things evolve, I mean, we've learned this in the oil and gas business for 100 plus years. It's the ground game is what's important, and that relationship with the landowner is where it all begins. And as a greenfielder, or a developer, as a landman, you're that conduit between the landowner and the company and the business. Flash forward to right now, we got a lot of fatigue out there. We've got a lot of, maybe bad rap going, a lot of the wrong narratives being pushed. And it kind of goes to that, the price you pay when you're trying to speed and racing to, get position. Stewardship is the thing, right? We have a responsibility to be stewards of our industry with the landowner. And just tell me how you explained it. Share some of your experience on how that's evolved, and what does stewardship mean to you and to your team and the folks on your team that are working in the space. What can you share to what maybe responsible development should look like today?
Yeah, well, first with really working with our landowners, it's to your point, stewardship matters, and a lot of the things I always think about is being very principled. I just have a very principled leadership style, and just, thinking about integrity selling and working in a way that first genuinely listens and understands their needs and what they're looking for. Because when I was at Shell, I was like did all this pedigree of commercial skills and certifications, and one of the things I always learned from the mentor is like, it's about the numbers, it's not about the numbers. And that not about the number part is really, really important. And it's also about trust. And part of that trust, if you probably heard of like maybe trust advisors has this trust equation, which is like credibility plus reliability and intimacy over self-orientation is the quotient, but that credibility is the easy one. Like, fine, I'm a military guy and whatnot, get some respect there a little bit. But at the end of the day, like if you don't have that, you can earn some, respect, but you can't earn openness. And part of that openness is just genuinely listening. And so just having that skill set to understand their needs and understand maybe not even just their needs, because we know we can deliver them a value with money, but the other part is like thinking about, separating yourself from the deal and being on the other side of them, but like putting yourself in their perspective and trying to understand their story, because especially with some of the older generation landowners who've been doing, grazing land and been, have steer on their land and doing all different types of things with what they have. I always think it's important to dignify somebody's journey. And so for somebody like me who like, hey, my parents are immigrants. I haven't been in this country for generation on generation, but like, I always think whether it's me or whether it's one of my other contract agents or land agents or they're working with somebody, I always think it's important to understand where someone is coming from. It is dignify what brought them to where they are, because they're handing something over to you that has a lot of story behind it. And the more you understand where someone's coming from, the more they're more willing to trust that you're going to do right by them. Whether the deal goes through or the deal doesn't go through, because we have deals that fail, as you know, because of different things we control and don't control, and just being honest and genuine about that. And so one of the other things I'm really serious about too is just being very candid and transparent about what I can control, what the team can control, and what we can't control. And sometimes we get questions, and I've gotten literally questions on the data center side, like first thing, right out the bat, what are you doing about water? What are you doing about water? What are you doing about water? Why do you answer that question, right? Some people are going to answer it and start, beating around the bush or saying something they don't know and that really isn't the truth, and they're a half truth, and and just being really candid about how you respond and what and what we can do, and also how we can be thoughtful around it. And in many cases, what I try to do is also be clear that there have been bad actors out there, right? And we all know that, and all companies are treated the same and are equal. But we are trying to earn back that trust right now. We're working against what's been seen in the media, and what sells in the media is usually the thing that's the worst case scenario, right? But development should be boring. And so what I always try to speak to is like, how can we make this boring? How can we make this a way that thinks about how to do this in a thoughtful, responsible way? And a lot of that starts with just doing the data, understanding what we're going to be doing in due diligence, what would be our stage gate, where will we walk away? As you could probably appreciate, you probably heard in the news around recently, there was a project that Diet Ventures had, I think it was in Henderson County, that withdrew, right? And, there's big media around it. It was like, oh my gosh, see, data centers, they're terrible. The project withdrew, market's going down, crashing. No, that's actually a great thing. That's a good thing that they're just withdrawing, because they have other things in their portfolio. They've seen something there that maybe it's not going to work, right? Like, they're not going to just push it down someone's throat and just say, hey, let's keep going, and then hope to, or have it becoming a bigger problem later, right? So I think that's a good signal to me, is when we're being thoughtful, we're understanding what makes our every individual relationship winner we deal with tick, and shaping a deal and shaping opportunities that are meaningful to their concerns. And the more that they can find that one guy, again, it might be the landman, might be me, it might be whoever it is that heard them and hears them, then there's a high chance that deal is going to be successful, because they know that person will ultimately do right by them, regardless of the numbers in the contract or whatnot. But yeah, we'll put the things in the contract just in case I get hit by a bus. But we'll always try to do right by an individual, and that's what I always share with my team, to do those things. And then maybe one last thing is the process. Like, we sometimes make the process really, really difficult, and I'm very big about trying to streamline the process. Everything to do to make it a white glove treatment. You know, as you can appreciate, I don't know if you all have like Quicken Loan, I'm using them as an example, or or Rocket Mortgage. You know, nowadays when you go for a home loan, or redo or refinance your mortgage, you're like, oh man, I don't want to do all that paperwork. Some of these companies just make it so streamlined for you, and you're just like, you hit one button and it's like everything's done. You get the closing, you're like, oh great, wow. Like, that's what I always I want to say. It's like, we are a service business too. Like, we need to be thinking about that, thinking about, like, it's already hard enough to think about changing and doing something that requires change, and working through a deal that someone may have second thoughts on. Let's make the process as streamlined as possible and meet them where they are. And then, as part of that trust equation, always delivering what we're going to say we're going to do. Rely and on the littlest thing possible, whether it's just that, hey, I'm going to follow up with you tomorrow, next week, and just kind of keep that tempo and be sure that, we're saying what we're saying, we're going to do what we're going to do.
Yeah. You talk about, we talked a lot about, the landman or the land agent or the developer to the landowner. But some of the thing, this narrative that you're starting to see, you mentioned it, water, right? And that's a big thing in Texas, right? And it kind of gets to the heart and soul of what Texas is. We meet people from all over the country, and where are you from? Texas. Oh, cowboy, and cows and horses and water. It's a big thing. What is the industry? I'm just curious about, as an industry, as a data center industry, and, even renewable development, solar and things like that, but data center in particular, what should the narrative be, or how should the narrative change around that discussion? As an industry, how do you address that concern? Or how does the technology need to advance such that there's a meaningful explanation and a viable explanation, like, no, we're not going to deplete the water table in this area with this project, and this is why. Share with me maybe how, where we stand today, and what should the narrative be, or maybe where do we need to be as an industry to address that concern?
Yeah. I would always say first the latter part, where do we need to be as an industry? And this kind of brings me back to some of the analogs for, like, say, when I was in offshore wind, is, sometimes, like, you do things that are coordinated, right? When you need to, and collaborative, rather than just everybody kind of going off in their own space to do it as like investors or developers. And so right now we're more in the latter, where we're kind of all chasing speed to power, right?
Yeah.
But the downside of coordination, it sometimes slows you down, right? Because then you have to, like, wait for the next guy to keep up and then work through a solution on how.
Well, there's a huge prize out there. There's a huge prize for someone to get it. This is the American dream. You better go get it, son.
Exactly. So an example, though, with, like, ERCOT, though, when it comes to, like, the load side, we just did that, right? We just went through that, where everybody was throwing in load applications that they said, wait, got time out. Slow it down, but we're going to go fast. So we have to kind of do the same thing here, where I feel like there needs to be more of an effort to just proactively get our standards out there from the hyperscalers and from the customers, to be sure that we're laying that out and laying that blueprint out that would work for not just the water, but also for other parts, even load flexibility requirements, or land requirements, or title commitment types of things, and things that are around the bankability, so that we all know what the North Star is, and we are planning to that in a way that we can be very transparent to the communities and to the regulators and to, and all those involved, right? And then also to the supply chain. So, I would say it's one of those things where, from that perspective, the water is like, I always stage gate things. It's really more like, we are always gonna need to understand and it goes for any resource. What is the situation on the ground? Every developer needs time to understand that and look at that and analyze that, and then understand their impacts. And so I think we just have to be thoughtful around trying to find a path to be very clear about those stage gates of, what type of closed loop technology we could do, open loop, what is the true impact, and what we can do to mitigate that, and then put together a solution that's thoughtful and responsible, And not just say, hey,
And
we're just gonna do it. Yeah, and digestible.
Digestible. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really what I'd share with at least when I speak to landowners or others. I said, hey, if this deal, if the water doesn't work, we're going to walk away. Like, and you're not going to get any money because we're not going to put our reputation on line. Especially a company like Hanwha, where we are a South Korean conglomerate. The reputational risk for us is not worth it to do something it's going to harm the environment or harm the community. If I was maybe, I hate to throw out names, but if I was Kevin O'Leary or Elon Musk, like I can shove it down your throat and fly to Mars and back, and like I'll get a slap on the wrist, but that's it, right? I'm still around.
I'm still the darling of America.
Yeah.
You're driving my Teslas everywhere.
Exactly. So there's some companies that won't do that, and so that's what we're working against. We're trying now to restore the trust that the precedence has been set early in a way that obviously not very helpful. And I think the Texas market's a great area to do that because there's been some ways to shape it to move things around. And as we start to get the momentum, we can obviously make that work in other markets that we're obviously site selecting in as well too, like PJM and the Northeast and the Southeast and the West and whatnot.
Yeah, man, that's a good transition. Natalie and her team do a lot of work all over the country, right? And so we get different flavors. There's definitely different attitudes if you're working ERCOT versus PJM or some of the other markets.
Yes, sir.
Natalie, what are some of the unique kind of differences and challenges that you and your team are seeing with the convergence of oil and gas and data center development and utilities and hyperscalers and things like that? What are some of the nuances you're seeing? And
I mean, even in PJM, you're still talking about a heavy oil and gas area up there, just as you would in Texas. So there's a lot of similarities. The main differences in the different ISOs is truly the way they connect in and the speed to power. So the reason that ERCOT is most attractive right now is it is the most favorable to move into. But I'd be curious to hear from True. Our governor recently, we've had some interesting things happen in Texas. Our governor recently set out a set of parameters for data center development. And I'd be interested to hear your take on that. And if you feel it's going to be amenable or restrictive, or what you feel overall with his requirements.
And maybe also just give a baseline like explanation of what that guidance meant to address for the folks that are listening.
Yeah, there's a few of them. There's some that's more administrative, like reporting of certain things of like water use and power consumption, things that I'd have to look I believe so. But there's some specifics around, the technology and what the usage is over time. The one kind of nuance there, I think, was like some of that is not typically done by the utility and PUCT because some of that sits into the Texas water, environmental than it does there. But I'm sure they'll solve all that. But the principles were important, and it's just to really set a blueprinting direction to say, hey, like there's got to be some guide rails here because we all can't be running, all around the highway. You ever been in traffic and you're just driving and there's a stop up there in Texas, they just go all the way off the theater roads and around. Like we need to get some guide rails up here, and like if you stay in order, we'll all get there eventually, right? So it's kind of the same here. We got to have a little bit of like guide rails so that we'll all get there and let's work through these. And I think the big one, I think the PUCT and ERCOT's been already kind of moving in that direction, which is great. So one of the guide rails was around power and flexible load, and more about the cost and how that cost is allocated, right, to and paid for. And so from a load perspective, I haven't heard one hyperscaler or any customers we work with to say we're not willing to pay our fair share. I do wish, though, the utilities were a little bit more, found a better way to be more transparent about how costs are paid in our bills and your bill, so that the narrative's a little bit easier, because it's easy to just pick on the boogeyman right now, which is you see all these, the large load, but cost causation, and it is really hard to prove because I'm getting a little technical in my weeds here, but like there's a lot of ship factors and things around how the power is transformed and transferred that it's hard to really prove to say like you're responsible for this and that violation and therefore you pay this. So there's always debates around cost causation and allocation from load and generation in the grid more broadly. So that's why historically, it's always been really hard to figure out, like, did this generator or this load cause my bill to go up here and this? But I wish there was an easy way to do that so that we at least are not viewed as a liability to the grid, but more on the other side of the ledger, asset to the grid. And the way that we are in,
no, I mean, that was a big thing with the mandate that the governor put out. And I was really wondering and wishing it was getting a little bit more attention, because I feel like it would put some of the landowners at ease, right? With some of the narratives that are being shared. I mean, they're asking, that facilities must cover their own grid interconnection and transmission infrastructure expenses. They've got to add capacity to the grid. They've got to rapidly reduce power and curtail at the request and air call, right? And they're wanting water to be efficient and requesting closed loop systems so more efficient piece of water. So they're doing all of the different things that we see most of the arguments on, especially like in social media or in the news, right? What I'm most interested to see is in 2027, the governor's idea of how he's going to address and handle tax abatements and incentives for local communities, because he, has said he's going to address that. I'm wondering what that ripple effect is going to be for some of these projects.
Yeah, there's a double-edged sword, on that last one, because in some ways that allows us to naturally engage the community. And that's when I was on the soil development side, like I've been to, different, various hearings related to tax abatements and for chapter 13 through 12. And that's been a value because at least, you have some way to engage, because there's no statutory jurisdictional limits that require consent and zoning to make that happen, at least in Texas. I know in PJM it's different, but so that's an advantage. But I would say, at least for us, and I'm assuming for most developers, regardless of whether there is an incentive program or some pathway, we're going to engage. We're going to engage the community. We're going to engage the AHJs, the county officials and things. So we want them, just given where the environment is now, to at least have the same narrative we do, so that when someone sees us in their backyard or working with this landowner, they know what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we're going about it. And that we can be a trusted partner, irrespective of what is in place right now. But back to the load piece real quickly, though, I think, it's the thing that I'll be frank makes me always nervous, but I do think the utilities are doing a great job of it by way of the rules that they're working through in the interconnection standards, is trying to make sure that the lights don't turn off, right? Like that we don't have any flicker, a brownout, a blackout. Those are things that they're going to protect and preserve. And so a lot of what they are trying to do in terms of standardization, as well as like kind of drip feeding in the load, I believe that between now and 2032, which is where all the different megawatts are going to be pulled into for every year for all of the different 400 gigawatts of loaded requests, which I believe will probably be about 100. That's just my thinking when we hear next month.
Agreed.
What you ask for and what you get is different.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that most of that's going to be all the base load or all the stuff that's like really known that's not going to trip the required upgrades is all going to be like in 2028, 2027, 2028, and 2029. And then the rest is going to be 2030. So it'll give them time. It'll give us time to first bring down the costs, as you can know. Like if you may have heard that, if you have an existing highway or your existing grid infrastructure, you add more to it. You have more megawatt hours that you can socialize the cost around. So that actually lowers the overall cost of bills. I think that will be the case, and I hope that will be the case here in the first 2 to 3 years. It will also give the ability for us as an industry to gain trust with our load, with the utility, so they know how to manipulate and work with it as they then bring on these bigger upgrades in 2030, 31, and 32. And so my hope here is that we don't lose our shirt, we don't break the grid, which I think they will find a way to manage that way in a slow ramp, while we're bringing the bridge power behind the scenes to still bring our early power to our hyperscalers, and then minimize the issues of the worst thing that could happen, which is to have a major outage. And as you can appreciate, if a major outage happens, that can just bring in all the regulators, and just like, Storm Uri and other things like that. And that just creates way more uncertainty than nothing happens. So I'm pleading with all those out there that are the smart and savvy technology folks that are working all the things around voltage ride-throughs and other provision and software to manage and mitigate some of these issues around power quality, and and oscillations and everything else that can happen, that they, help us and help everybody so that we don't have any of those situations occur.
Yeah. I think the industry's looking for a success story, right? It's like, show us the way, show us that it can happen. And then, you can mitigate some of that public perception of what we're seeing there.
Yeah. But I do think though, it feels like, I guess like feels like an avalanche coming down. And I, putting myself in the shoes of, the communities, the landowners, because it's a lot that we're all taking in. But back to that grid, I do think the utilities will do right, because that is their mandate. They have to keep the lights on. They're going to have to drip feed this. And that just means that we might have more, at least in ERCOT, more power come online later while we still have the bridge power earlier. But there's downsides to the bridge power, and I can get into that piece too. It has ups and downs, but that's just my hope and what I think could happen.
It's their mandate to keep the power on. It's also been their mandate from Burke to figure out a way to connect into these data centers. So they're sitting in a pretty stressful seat right now. I have all the sympathy for the utilities, honestly. Brent mentioned something earlier about the differentiation between the different ISOs. And I wanted to bring up for our listeners who may not be aware, because, we're all working in Texas right now, so we know this, but we have listeners all over the place. Texas in and of itself has 4 different ISOs. There's 4 different ones. And we talk about ERCOT because it's like the Mac Daddy of the ISOs in Texas. But, we also, MISO's nothing to flinch at, and neither is SPP. And we've got a little bit of El Paso out there with WEC, right? So even just being a developer in Texas like you are, you're still having to stay cognizant of 4 completely different ways to interconnect and 4 different kinds of requirements. How challenging is that for you?
It's just like any portfolio. I mean, you want to diversify, and so we definitely have interests in projects that are early stage in both, at least SPP as well as in ERCOT. And so the advantage, of course, of ERCOT, as we kind of talked a little bit about it, that they're moving along. We're going to start getting some certainty around, the batch 0 and then batch 1's just right behind it, and so forth. But SPP, they've been working at this on their process for, on just a clustering process for several years, even before data centers was really becoming a big thing. And so we feel really good about how they're considering, I don't want to get in all the nuance of the acronyms with the chills and the, and the generation interconnection, but just trying to find ways to somewhat do what ERCOT's doing, right? Which is, at the end of the day, it's like making sure that you have a way to have a flexible load so that, when there is congestion right there, which meaning like you can't get all those electrons on the grid, you have some ways to back that up, and you have something there that can help them make sure that they don't have a lot of violations and outage issues around that particular pocket in the transmission. So it's a good thing that there's other differences in way that other TSP or ERCOT or ISOs are working things. I would say one thing that's really different though, like for SPP, and what makes me a little bit nervous, and it kind of ties to land with ERCOT, is that the requirements are, how can I say it? The requirements that are needed, it's not for the faint at heart. There's for sure the requirements are gonna minimize like people like dropping out in restudies, which meaning like, you put in your financial security, and, in the past, like in some of the other ISOs and RTOs, because I worked in all of them at some point in time in onshore wind and whatnot, like you could just drop out, like, right? You might drop out because your project doesn't work. You don't have all your site control, or you have some issues with some encumbrances and whatnot. We're obviously going to see a lot less of that under this process because of what they've done underneath the rulings, because you're going to have to pay $50,000 a megawatt over, 40, most of that's at risk, right? So it's going to cause a lot of, and it already has caused a lot of push to get site control in order with those applications. And in some cases, having closings done by the time by the IA. And so that's going to put a lot of stress on all of us on the land side, right? Because now we're going to have to be working really hard to move these projects, even if some of them are not ready to go. because there's so much money at stake to get everything locked in, which means all the folks all the way up to title insurance and on down and legal, and also like our friends on the oil and gas side, that if we do have any severances around minerals and reservations of rights that we need to work through on surface use, that's all got to get done. So that's what makes me a little bit nervous, is that in ERCOT, it's good that we're moving quick, and I'm glad they did, but now we still have to do right by how we're building out and working through all the challenges on the land side in a way that still keeps us make sure we're a good actor and do it in a responsible, thoughtful way.
Yeah. And that Henderson County project that you talked about earlier that was killed off, that was in MISO, right? And that's in Eastern District of Texas. And, that's something that's worth mentioning since we're talking about data center development in Texas. Why is there not a lot of projects in MISO? Well, it's the patent lawsuits that pop up in the very plaintiff favorable Eastern District of Texas, right?
Yeah, yes.
And it's almost like you see it go through Louisiana to Shreveport, and then there's like this gap in MISO, and then it comes back into ERCOT, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that anyone that is new to development in Texas needs to definitely understand.
Yeah, and I don't want any other areas getting any ideas, but that definitely is a gap, and it's been something that has stirred people away. So don't.
Well, that kind of lines up with challenges, right? It's every area has got its own personality, and for all the obvious reasons we've talked today. But one of the things that we're starting to see are some of this county level kind of moratoriums and that public pushback. Nice. Hill County in Texas recently, Austin County. I mean, we got a couple that are just happening. Drew, do you see that as a trend? And how do you see we, as an industry that you're going to have to work past those challenges?
Yeah. First and foremost in industry, every developer, you can't put all their eggs in one basket. We know there's going to be challenges. And that's also why it's hard to predict the load growth, because a lot of times some developers are sitting on 3 projects and they know only one's going to clear. So I don't think we're ever going to get away from that, because there's so much uncertainty in just any kind of development, put aside just whether it's a data center or not. So that's real. And it's not for the faint of heart. We know there's going to be evolving, shifting, changing rules, provisions, and moratoriums on their own right aren't. Sometimes they can be active. They can be done in good faith, and sometimes they can be done in bad faith.
Exactly.
And in some cases, it's all about kicking the can down the road and extending again, and really having a lazy way of dealing with something that is trying to find a middle ground to make a project a win-win for the community, because projects can be a win-win community. And so I'm just in general, I don't ever like to give into a moratorium, because it makes it seem like, oh, well, that will just scare developer away.
Validity.
It gives it validity. But at the same time, we want to be at the table. We want to be at the table with the community, with the commissioners, and try to find ways to create a better narrative, to speak the language, not the language of the technocrats, but a language that they can understand around what it is that we're trying to do and how it can be beneficial to the community. And also, yes, bring and acknowledge the validity of the bad actors that are out there, because they do exist. And there have been those that have extracted way more than they should, but also acknowledge, well, what are we going to do different on this deal, while still acknowledging that those deals exist? Because if we don't make that acknowledgement, by the way, that there's no way that you can earn that trust, right? So it's just trying to find that right balance to just say, hey, they exist. Let's dig deeper into what's really the driver, the motivation. If it's in bad faith, then it's unfortunately might be an opportunity loss. And maybe the last thing I'll just say real briefly, because it reminds me of like the on the oil and gas side, the Permian Basin, right? You remember when the fracking boom happened, right? We're all over the place, right? And then eventually Haynesville, then, there's certain areas in Wyoming and places that started to be more pragmatic around how we do this. And then the areas that did not do that, then there were lost opportunities. And so I hope here's
the importance. Highlights the importance and the role of the state governing bodies. And setting the tone of what's going to be allowed and what's not, and how do you, address the needs of business to progress and address the needs of the community. You see states where you don't have that checks and balances. Colorado, for instance, in oil and gas. Colorado is very boisterous about, we don't want oil and gas development in our state, and therefore they allow communities and counties and cities around, Denver to basically set the standard for what you can do as a community to halt this kind of progress and development. And I think eventually the state, Governor Abbott, his office, and the regulatory bodies in Texas are going to have to put some guardrails on that. Like, okay, guys, you can't just put a moratorium up for the sake of delaying a project to kill it so it's not in your backyard, right? There's got to be that balance of, what is a reasonable outcome of voicing your concern for your community to say, if you're in Central Texas, water's a big deal. Absolutely. If you're in East Texas, water isn't as big of a deal, or Southeast Texas, right? And so how do you manage that? How do you establish those guardrails for, hey, this is how we're going to act as an economy, as a population, as a state.
Yeah. And one thing I'll just add to that too is that, like, and I always think about, because I used to be involved with a lot of valuation of project financing, been on the commercial side, but also been on the side with my land team and the land side. And yeah, the numbers will make it viable, but like but at the end of the day, the narrative is what's going to make it possible, right? So we got to spend a lot of time in that narrative. I in the past, earlier in my career, didn't realize how important that is to really be able to create a narrative. And it's a challenge. It's even more challenging today than it was 10 years ago, because with social media, everybody's just using clickbait to use the biggest story that's sexy sells. Danger and dramatic situations sell, like putting a glass of water that has like that is brown because it had somehow indirectly was tied to a data center.
The data center did this.
Yeah.
It was like, no, you scooped it out of a mud hole.
Yeah. Or better, this is the best one, an offshore wind one. This was a real killer. Like back when I was in that space, it was like the one on Fox News. The first time I saw a whale up on the shoreline in New Jersey, and then you start talking about whales. I was like, oh man, we got some work to do. Because it sells. So those are the things, how to really counteract that, and then acknowledge, hey, maybe I could exist, but what are we doing differently to make sure that doesn't happen?
Yeah. So we spent better part of an hour talking about, all the challenges, right? And one thing that's inevitable, progress will happen, and these projects, the right projects, will get built. And ultimately, maybe they're not going to look like we all envisioned. The grand, big projects, a lot of smaller projects more likely be built. Where are we going to have to give? What are some of the things we touched earlier on? Title insurance, for example, and to get ultimately as the opportunity in the areas that are actual viable areas to build these projects.
Yeah.
As that gets smaller and smaller, risk tolerance is going to have to go up, right? Mm-hmm. What are some of the areas that you see, in the whole spectrum of what needs to happen that we're going to have to evolve and get more educated at the company level, at the, insurability level, for example, with taking on more risk to actually get a project built?
Yeah.
What are some of the areas you see that are going to need to evolve to get to where we need to be?
Yeah, there are several, thinking about some of the actors, whether it be utilities, oil and gas, developers and hyperscalers, and developers kind of caught in the middle. They're dealing with these big, I call them like the clash of the titans, right? So they're pounding their chests, and they all have their requirements, and some of which have changed, gotten better, and some that still have opportunities. Like, for example, on the grid side of utility, we've seen them already work through what we call firm services and semi-firm services to help support data center loads, while still not saying we're going to curtail you all the time, right? So thinking through some programs that are specific around certain times of the day, quits in the peak, that we could curtail you in, or for example, in ERCOT, they're creating, a conditional load requirement where it's like, okay, well, your minimum is here, but we can take off this. You have 500 megawatts, but 100 of the 500 we can curtail you. That at least is like a halfway middle ground, right? That's giving you a little bit of certainty than saying your entire 500 megawatts, I can just wipe it out any time of the day. Like that's not giving, right? Give or take. Great example, right? But now if you go to the hyperscaler side, there are things that they can do still to help mitigate the fact that they require 5 nines, in some cases 3 to 5 nines of services. And so thinking about how we work for those, what we call tier 4 type of development for energy campuses that have the ability to take a little bit more risk when it comes to the redundancy aspect of it. So redundancy meaning, for example, n+1 or 2n. So I always use the example of like if you have a car and you have a spare tire, right? Or you can have 4 spare tires. But if they're requiring me to have 3 gas line lateral lines and trying to get all of my land agents and together to site all that and together working with the utilities, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of disturbance. So I caution the hyperscalers to think through how we can mitigate what are our requirements related to that. I also think about the hyperscalers with respect to the title work, and we'll go through all our surveys, we'll do all the title commitments, title insurance, and try to figure out what requirements are there and exceptions. But there are certain things that we need them along with the outside counsel to find an easier path that allows them to take on a little bit more risk and quite frankly consider an exception around. I know that the boogeyman in the world of data centers is access. Like access, you got to control access.
Accommodation,
accommodations. And so, especially in markets like Texas, also Pennsylvania. In Texas, obviously, where you have it's a mineral state, right, where the combination agreements, the doctrine applies, and that severance there. It's just very tricky to navigate it when we're very by the book on what we want. And then that goes back to the oil and gas players. Like they have a role to play. And my big ask of grace from them is just, expediency, just helping us get deals done faster with the likes of working with Dudley and other parties that we work with ourselves too, to just get standardize a little bit of those provisions between the outside counsel and title that allows us to be comfortable with what we can in order to get to a close. Because as I was mentioning earlier in Texas, there's a lot of haste right now to get to close because of everything that's pushing along as far as what the utilities requiring in order for you to say, I got a site that's assured and mature and ready to go. And the last one is on for them is really on like the use of the surface. Surface use, it's tricky and it's a puzzle piece. It's a lot of work, but just being and helping us. And there are some examples of great, by the way, there's examples of great oil and gas landmen that have been working with us directly, and I'm sure other parties that are going out of their way to do everything they can, but they're also working with a big gorilla too. Sometimes the big players like the Conocos and the, and Chevrons and the Shells that it takes time to move things along. And so I just wish we all were under the same North Star to say, hey, let's move this all along fast, because if we move it along fast, you or the oil and gas won't be the long pole in the tent in order for us to get the close. And because at the end of the day, it does impact speed to power, right? And so it's a win-win when we all kind of find a way to get these things done to help each other, because the more we bring in infrastructure, the more that helps oil and gas, especially in the Permian, around the 765 kV lines and whatnot. So there's just a lot there that has to play in. And I'll lastly say on the development side, the developer side, the developers are leaning in more on taking on more risk. And you see that with the cost of like the what needs to be put in place related to financial assurances requirements, not only for the load application, those have gone up. What you're exposed to in terms of stranded risk has gone up, and in terms of making sure we pay our fair share. And then the other part too that has really played a big role for developers, that's a really big challenge, at least for us, is like on the power side. Because as I mentioned before, for Hanwha, we're not just selling land; we are also doing energy service agreements for providing behind the meter generation. That means, and we're going to be putting in some financial assurances and giving you surety that we're going to deliver this by a certain time, while also, backing it up with our big parent company to say, hey, we're going to give you, something happens, we're going to, pay it out, right?
Get the means to support that and withstand it. Yeah,
exactly. So all I'm saying is that the developers are carrying a lot more risk than they used to. So I think what's going to happen is you're probably going to see some developers say, hey, like, I got this project, I'm going to have to put in more later, and hey, you guys interested in it? Because I just can't wear it. And the last thing we need is for projects to just be falling out that really are good projects that should go. So we'll pick them up. We'll try to, but Hanwha alone can't do that. So that's the thing, is I think the hyperscalers are going to have to think about how to maybe bridge that risk for some developers, so that projects still keep moving along, or change that aspect from the financial assurance side of things.
Yeah. It's definitely 4D chess.
Yeah. It's a chicken. Yeah. There's, in commercials, optionality control, and there's your chicken and egg, and we're all always trying to figure out how to pull things along in different ways, but it's the same across all industries. But this case, we're just moving pretty quick, and there's new provisions or new requirements that I think we all just need to be a little bit more, everybody at the table needs to think about how to just pull the risk on a little bit different, share that risk, with support, like I said earlier, of like even getting title insurers to help support some exceptions needed so that we can get the close and things like that to just make it a little bit more streamlined, so that we don't slow down the overall opportunity, especially with all the work that ERCOT's doing, all the work the PUCT is doing. Why would we want that work to go for naught, and then all of a sudden we can't get it closed because we just can't get the title, executed on a deal.
Can't get the title, can't get the operator to get on board.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're going to see we're starting to see that ultimately this is going to require a conglomeration of interested parties from all these different spaces, right? Title's got to be aligned with the E&P company, has got to be aligned with the developer, got to be aligned with the end user. It has to be aligned with the community. So I think it's what you'll start to see. And I feel that 5-7 years from now, as this matures, you're going to have these super conglomerates of competing interests that are going to get together to say, hey, if we can get this done, it's best for all of us. If I'm an oil and gas operator and I've got excess gas coming out of the Permian Basin, that I'm having to sell or basically pay to get rid of, why wouldn't I want to contribute that to this project, to provide the behind the meter support, to meet the needs of the concerns of the community, to also meet the needs of the hyperscaler. It'll get there. You got to have a lot of people fail. You got to do a lot of things wrong, and the cream has to rise to the top. And
cream to the top.
And I'm optimistic we'll get there. Anything worth having isn't easy.
No, it isn't. It isn't. It reminds me also when I was in the military, because I love capital markets matter, and I'm a believer in competition, but it's in the cases like this when you have like such a big mission, where it's like it almost feels like a race to the moon, space race. There does have to be some aspect of coordination to just make sure things move along, and there has been a little bit of that. But we're all going to have a little bit of different incentives, but we have to try not to create too much of bureaucracy around the coordination, but just be pragmatic while keeping things moving along, and just be very responsible, thoughtful of all of our talent, our resources, and even the impact to the community related to its resources and easements and requirements and things and corridors that we're using to build all this out everywhere. So it's it's not easy.
It's gonna be a ride.
It's not.
Well, Drew, man, we've been a great conversation. You've got a wealth of knowledge. I love having guests on like you, because God, I've come away feeling like A, that I'm stupid, but B, that I'm smarter for it. And so thank you for sharing some of your experience and your knowledge. I'd love to have you back to see, maybe in a couple years, to see how things have changed and how it's progressed. And man, I'm got all the confidence in the world that if anybody's got a shot, it's you and your team. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing some of your experience and some of your perspective on this thing that's important to landmen. And these what landmen can get out of these conversations is invaluable, because again, to bring it full circle, they're the conduit between you and the landowner and the mineral owner. So thanks for sharing that today.
Yeah, I just want to also, if I can, so do a shout out to Wesley Taylor, also to to Tyler Smith and Patrick. I had a great land team, and I there's people out there that are guys that I'll give the shirt off my back to do what the work they've done for me and for us to get deals done. I mean, it's never I don't think any organization can ever appreciate what landmen do and what amount of work they do to get things done. And I have a strong appreciation for that. So a lot of good people out there doing great things. And even folks like Nathan Eubanks and others that we're at it, and they're the ones that are the tip of the spear.
Yeah, they are. And Drew, man, thank you. Thank you for being a friend and coming on the podcast with us. I think I've come away with two things, and that is development needs to be boring, and we probably need 1,000 more Drew Burkes in this industry. Be more like Drew. That's the slogan.
Be like
right?
Drew.
Be more like Drew.
No, well, I'm always learning to learn. That's the only thing I learned from college. Learn to learn and keep trying to be a better version of myself as I learn more too with the likes of yourselves. Because again, I get energy from you and in terms of what I get out and do every day together with, to help in any way I possibly can. So yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks, Natalie.
Well, Drew, man, we close every podcast with, if anybody needs to reach out to you, how can they find you? What's the best way to get to Drew?
LinkedIn, reach out to me there. We're also always looking at sites. So I probably have about like 10 to 15 to 20, like literally 20 sites a week that comes through our desk that we're looking at across markets in PJM. And right now is a big focus for ours, given our retail energy footprint there from a retailer perspective. And, still looking at Texas and other markets, but, but we are heavily interested in opportunities that we can partner and provide value, especially in the Northeast right now today. But yeah, awesome. Anything, reach out.
Good deal. Well, Nathan, Drew, thanks for joining us, man. I was thinking about Nathan. You mentioned Nathan earlier.
Oh, no, yeah.
Thanks for joining us, man. We'd love to have you back sometime.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Enjoyed today's topic? Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Learn more at dudley-land.com. See you next episode.